if we don't define ourselves, we risk other people defining us.
On n'a pas besoin juste d'une bonne entreprise sociale, mais d'une belle histoire. Vous avez aussi besoin de quelqu'un qui veut voir cet impact social.
So we know that we have to be the ones that make the progresses. And that's the social innovation culture.
Being a social entrepreneur or being an entrepreneur with a soul doesn't mean that you're not making money. You want a pin-up of yourself. I'm Chenjerai Katanda from Harare, Zimbabwe, and today I'm going to talk to you about the experiences that I've heard running a business. My slide will have, my deck will actually have a number of pictures, and all those pictures are pictures that were taken in documenting school sports in Zimbabwe, and the ones that I particularly chose for this, I took all of them. So if you do want to say something about them, just to make me feel happy, go ahead and do that. But if you also have cross-constructive criticism, that's welcome. So just to start us off, I didn't take this one. So the sports pictures. I don't know if you have this in Bulgaria, but this is what we call back home in Zimbabwe a frizzet. And I'm just showing you so that when I explain the next thing, you are all going to sort of like understand where I'm coming from. But we do get, for Zimbabwe in particular, and Harare, which is the capital city of Zimbabwe where I come from, the range is very little. So in terms of temperature, so we have, say, about 20 degrees Celsius to about 30 degrees Celsius throughout the year. And unlike everyone else, or unlike almost everyone else, we don't have 4 seasons, we only have 2. So we have summer and winter. It's either cold or hot. And when it gets hot, when it reaches the high 30s, then frizzets are such a big hit with small kids because they keep you cool. It's basically flavored water that is frozen, and you just eat it out of the plastic. So the reason why I'm showing you this, you might wonder, that was actually my first business. So today we're talking about School Sports Network, we're talking about education matters, but my first business was actually selling frizzets. And some of you might be thinking, how much do you make from that? I was only 6 when I started that business. And what happened with that, unfortunately, I actually didn't make any money, but it was the first lesson. So remember, this is lessons learned from my experiences doing entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship. So I'd get my pocket money during the week. I'd save it. So by the end of the week, I'll probably have about 2 or 3 Zim dollars. And I'd buy my frizzets. So that would probably buy 12 frizzets because one was about 50 cents. But I knew that to be successful in business, you have to sell, right? And I wasn't buying from a wholesale, so I was buying from someone else who was also selling frizzets. And then I would talk to my friends. Guys, it's hot, come and buy my frizzets. Why should we buy your frizzets when we can go and buy there? Oh, mine are cheaper. So I was buying frizzets for 50 cents, selling them for 30 cents. And my business was booming because in 20 minutes, all of them would be gone, right? So it just comes back to the lesson that we've been hearing all morning, that being a social entrepreneur or being an entrepreneur with a soul doesn't mean that you're not making money. So I've always wanted to make people happy. I wanted to make my friends happy. I wanted to keep them cool. I can argue as a social entrepreneurship, especially when you factor in the fact that I was selling these frizzets at a huge discount of 20 cents. And then Sunday would come, Monday would come, and I would have my money, get more pocket money. So good thing is I had my mom, who was a really good investor, because every week I was getting investment, right? And it kept on going until she realized, what's going on here? And she was like, yeah, I'm not giving you money for that. So my pocket money dropped and everything just went like, okay. So I stopped it. So that business failed. And just to come back to one of the questions we had in Ismail's presentation, a lot of times we hear about the successes, but we don't hear about what happened earlier. What happened first? What was your first failure? And that because in a lot of our societies, we do not want to talk about failing. We don't want to, we don't say failing is a good thing. And as you'll see, that's one of the lessons that I'm going to talk about. So a flopping business with Frizzits was the first one, and I'll let you all take or deduct whatever lesson you want from that, but don't sell your produce or your service at an amount that's lower than what you're acquiring it for. Nobisa in the morning, she mentioned a friend of hers who's been talking about, I want to get into this business, I want to do this business, but he's celebrating his 10th anniversary working for someone else. So first lesson that I learned in 2012 when I started SSN, it was just, to be honest, it was by accident. I didn't want it to be a business. I had played school sport when I was in high school. I'd represented Zimbabwe under 19 rugby sevens. So I was just excited about that. Actually, when I was representing Zimbabwe for under 19 sevens, we traveled to Kenya for this huge African tournament, but it also had teams from France, teams from Greece, and they all came and were playing rugby. So it was a huge thing. But then on going back home, you're just an 18-year-old boy, right? You want a pin-up of yourself. So we get back home, but there's no publicity whatsoever because school sport doesn't matter. So at that time, when I had that idea, it would be lovely to have a pin-up of myself and take down Beckham's pin-up or John Alom's pin-up and just put myself. Fortunately, it didn't happen. But when I started SSN in 2012, I set out to actually make that happen for other kids. And we also had a question in the last presentation about what happens with a business that starts as a normal business and then grows into a social enterprise. Sometimes it's the other way around, depending on how you're defining social enterprise and business. But in the case of SSN, it actually wasn't a business to start with. It was supposed to be a blog because I said, oh yeah, I have free time, I'm not occupied at the moment, I can go out and write about school sport, put it on a blog and people will read. So every Saturday I'd go out, do a rugby match, because it was all about rugby. Actually, the name changed from Front Row. So if you know rugby, you'll know that Front Row is a thing in rugby. So it was actually called Front Row Zim because it was just documenting high school rugby in Zimbabwe. And then one day I'm at this rugby game and there's a hockey game for girls that's happening before that. I'm like, oh, no one is doing hockey because it's still school sport. I'm here thinking I need to do rugby because rugby is what I'm passionate about the most. So I just went and I covered the hockey game as well. And then in the evening when I did my blog posts, I had 2 blog posts, a hockey post and a rugby post. And people were ecstatic about it. We had about 23 readers that day. And it was amazing for me because you think, whoa, people are actually reading. And because Zimbabweans are all over the world, you know, you go into Google Analytics and you see someone is reading from Washington, D.C. You're like, yes, I've made it. But it was just 23 people. But that wasn't a bad thing because I wasn't in this for business. Remember, I was just writing my ideas, sharing my stories. But the reason why I'm telling you this story is just dive in, just do it. And it's been said again this morning, I think Neda was kind of sneaky in putting us in the order that we're going to speak, because I find myself referring to a lot of things that have been said this morning. So kudos to you, Neda, for doing that. But one of the things that was mentioned was the biggest problem is actually not the funding. The biggest problem is actually not the money. So as I continue with my presentation, you'll sort of like learn to understand where School Sports Network is now and the value that's attached to it. But in terms of diving in, I actually dove in with $13. It was domain registration and 1 month's hosting. That's what SSN was started with. And it just started, and we're getting 23 readers then, but last year we actually reached 236,000 people reading our content. Yeah, I think my presentation is all mixed up. So diving in, that's failing fast and failing really quick. Remember we spoke about failure? You don't want to, you can imagine, Ismail put in $100,000 and it all went to waste. I mean, it's a good experience now and it's helping him where he is now, but you can imagine if that's your life saving and you put it there and you lose it. Whereas you want to try an idea, you want to do that prototype and put it to market, you put in 5 lever and you test it, yes, it's your hardened 5 lever, but it's just 5 lever. It doesn't compare to 1,000 lever, right? So whatever you have, whatever you want to test out, go in there, do it, and see the reaction, and then move from there. And then with that, like I said, it's all been mentioned already. I could go into this and try to redo Nawisa's presentation, but she spent the whole morning talking about networking and relationships. Relationships are everything. They are absolutely everything. If you are this person who keeps to themselves, and yes, we do talk about networking and going out to meet people, but the networks that you're in already, your family, your friends, people that you went to school with, people that you know already, how are you making them work for you? If you're starting up, so this lesson is a lesson I kind of learned the hard way, but hard way being I wasn't trying to build a business, I was trying to build a blog. So I wasn't using all those relationships. But it's actually a lot easier now with all the platforms we have, social media and everything. It was easy to reach out to those relationships once I realized I needed them, and it worked. So after, similar to the Frizzit business, after like a year of doing this, I realized, oh, I actually need to set aside money, because then you have to renew the domain name, you have to pay for more hosting, and I was like, oh, where am I getting this money? That's when I realized for this thing to keep going, it has to sustain itself. And that's when relationships came into play. And the biggest relationship I actually had at this time was actually my mom. I didn't have a laptop at the time, so you can imagine whose laptop I was using to write all the articles that I was posting. And I didn't have investment, I didn't have Ismail or a bank to go to, so you can also imagine again who the biggest investor was for this business. But from then on, I realized we need to start making money. We need to think about the customer. What are people after? So for a very long time, even up to now, we've tried to reduce it, but for a very long time, we then went into doing advertising because we had people coming in to read the content, and because it's such a niche platform, we're talking about school sport, we could go to stores that sell school sporting goods. We could go to people that sell school uniforms and all of that. So all of that happened, and it really worked well. But the biggest relationship, biggest relationship, in 2014, we partnered with Education USA. Going back again to your question of a business that starts as just a business and then becoming a social business. And what happened in 2014 was partnering with Education USA, we started working on sports scholarships, but as a social enterprise. So we're not charging students to say, come give me $1,000, I'll get a scholarship for you. But we're saying, come into our workshop, we'll give you the information that you need to apply for your own scholarship. Applying for a scholarship means you don't have money in the first place, so why should you be paying to get that service? So we worked with Education USA, but the biggest thing that came out of that is we didn't have electronic timing for track. If you know sport for track and field, we didn't have electronic timing in Zimbabwe at that time. And it was always my dream to say, because we had people qualifying for World Youths, for all these competitions, but they would go there, but because they'd qualified on hand time, they'd get a rude awakening. You leave Zimbabwe thinking, I'm the fastest guy on the planet, and then you get to Poland, like this time the World Youths were in Poland. You get to Poland and you're running against everyone else who's been timed electronically, and it actually turns out that your 10 seconds is actually 12 seconds. It was 10 seconds maybe because the teacher who was timing you maybe really liked you, or they were just really slow in starting their clock and really fast in stopping their clock. So with Education USA, we put together a proposal, and funding came through to buy the first electronic timing unit. So just to give you perspective, everything we bought equipment-wise to have this unit that we now offer in schools around Zimbabwe was about $55,000. And SSN, that led to this thing happening, had to put in $13 to start the business and the relationships. So you can understand what my colleagues were talking about, networks being the biggest currency. It was the relationship we had with Education USA was the gap between $13,000 and $50,000 funding to bring this equipment. That was the first in Zimbabwe at that time. Now there's two because the government then came in and installed one. But at this stage, I'm actually very proud to say it's the only mobile system. So you don't have to pay a stadium to use it. You just hire the system out at a very subsidized rate, and it comes out to your school, and everything happens, and you have electronic timed results that are equivalent to what people are getting in Jamaica, to what people are getting in Europe, to what people are getting in the States, and it just puts you on a level playing field. So that's the importance of relationships, and that is what I've learned. So whatever you're trying to build, think of the relationships that would work for your business, that would push you forward. That would be that gap between you not having any funding and you actually getting to what you want to where you want to get to next. Another lesson, focus. So Ismail went on about starting really small, even if it's something that's really humble, just start and focus on it. And I'll reiterate that statement. So when we're talking about focus in terms of business, entrepreneurs, we're very ambitious. Social entrepreneurs, we speak about, I want to change the world, I'm going to do this. And then there was a time after Mark Zuckerberg founded Facebook, everyone wanted to start the next biggest social network, and clones were coming left, right, and center, and everyone was trying to do that. But that's because of ambition. What we're not realizing is find something and focus on it. That can be fueled by passion, that can be fueled by the pure business sense behind it. It works, it's a need. There's a problem, and you're solving that problem through your solution. Great. But pick something, pick one thing, and for starters, run with that. I don't know what sort of projects we have in the house, but if anyone would maybe love to give even a hypothetical type of business, and then we can just run with sort of that and giving examples in terms of what I've learned. It's something that I learned. So all of these lessons are not coming from a good place. Some of them are actually coming from a really bad place. So I was like, I wish I'd focused a bit more then, and everything would have worked actually better than it's working out now. So they're hard lessons, but they're still lessons nonetheless. So if you have a hypothetical business or your business, you don't have to give us your name. You don't have to give us the name of the business so that we just keep it like anonymous, even though we're all going to go and look up your name and see what you do and figure out what your business is. Anyone to just come up with a business that does something, and we can sort of like work through how to actually focus that business. Anyone? Okay.
So I don't have a business, but I was wondering if you were keen to maybe explore something that's come up in your talk and maybe hasn't come up in what we've been discussing so far, which is really the notion of failure. I think a lot of us as humans have been socialized that failure is something that is really terrible and is a bad thing that can happen to you. And yet most of us who are entrepreneurs have now learned that failure is possibly a huge asset. And in fact, some of our greatest entrepreneurs around the world are people who've probably tried 8 times or 12 times before hitting that sweet spot of a really successful business. And so what is it about failure that we misinterpret as entrepreneurs and as people, and what do we do with that?
So it basically comes back to what I was saying about diving in and just being very rapid, going to market and failing, but failing fast and failing cheap. You don't want to lose $1 million. And that, I think that is where that notion comes from of, yeah, you know, when you've invested $1 billion, you can't then go on and fail. It's $1 billion. You can't fail. You can't throw $1 billion away. But if you come in and you lose $13, yes, you've lost the $13, you've failed, but what's the worst thing that's going to happen because you lost $13? Honestly speaking, nothing. It's just $13 at the end of the day. If you can even take it a notch down and you have 5 lever and you invest 5 lever into trying something out and it doesn't work, the worst thing that's probably going to happen is you're going to miss the bus and maybe you're going to miss your lunch. You're not going to die. That's it. So when you realize that nothing tragic is going to happen from failing, the only thing that's going to come out of it is actually you learning something. Then you're eager to try things, you're eager to explore, and it comes back even to the question of networking that was being addressed earlier. You don't want to, people were going on about someone not wanting to come out as really aggressive. Hi, I'm Chenjerai, here's my business card. But what's the worst thing that could happen? Someone just says, I don't want your business card. And if it's someone you're meeting for the first time, you're probably not going to meet them ever again. What do you have to lose? If it works, great. You're going to communicate via email and you're going to get a business deal. So just realizing that failing is just that. It's failing and life continues. And looking back at history, we have light bulbs flashing in my face right now. We have the whole Thomas Edison story that most of us have been told. They tried 1,000 times. I think some of it, I mean, I actually don't know how many times they tried, but people tell you they tried 999 times. He was about to give up and they did it again for the 1,000th time and it worked. I don't know if that's true, but what is definitely true is it didn't work the first time. If he had given up the first time it didn't work, then we wouldn't have light bulbs. I don't know what would be flashing in my face. I hope not fire. So I'm very glad and grateful for light bulbs. But it's having that realization that these things will happen. You'll fail, and that's it. And I actually have. I think there's a slide later on that I talk about like just failing and moving on with your life, because at the end of the day, it's just failing. I think boys, not to be sexist, but boys and men. It's something I was never good at. But you have, like, when you're growing up, there are boys that you're just walking in the street, they see a pretty girl, a beautiful girl, they go and say, can you be my girlfriend? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think what's happening with those boys, they're just realizing that the worst thing that's going to happen is she's just going to say no, and I'm going to move on to the next one. So apologies again, I'm not trying to be sexist, but just trying to drive that point across that failing is just that. It's just failing. You can do more by learning from what happens when actually someone says, no, you can't have that, or this business is not going anywhere, let's move on to the next one. And then another thing that has come in with especially Education Matters, we run a program called USAP, which assists high-achieving low-income students, and we work with them through a year-long program in their final year of high school to prepare and apply and strengthen their applications for universities in the States that are fully funded. And the actual program that is USAP, which we've taken into Education Matters with my partner, was started in 1999. And since 1999 up to date, it has helped over 350 students that have gone on to study at top US universities on full scholarships. But one thing that has happened this year, because we decided to give ourselves more time and to look into it, what we've seen coming across is, because we've decided to go into homes and actually visit these families. Before it would just be, students apply for the program because they know it, and they know students that have gone and now are working at the World Bank, or they've come back to Zimbabwe and they're doing great things that everyone is talking about. They also want that. So they apply and they know the program. But the parents, up until the day that this child is like escorted to the airport and they're flying off to a land that no one knows about but them and us, it's just been about the children. And this year we decided, why don't we try to be more humane about this and try and talk to the parents? With all the things that are going on in the world, parents are concerned about safety and they want to know about that, and they can't exactly ask their child because their child is going to tell them, Mom, it's going to be okay, because he has an opportunity to go to the States and he doesn't want their mom ruining that opportunity for them by worrying about their security, right? So those were things that were not even being addressed. So this year we've been doing those home visits. We have a cohort of 41, and the director, who's my partner, and myself have actually been doing these trips, and we're going to their families. But remember, I said high-achieving, low income. So you can imagine the diversity of the different housings and the different places, the different neighborhoods that they stay in, different levels of education. But what comes out is just like, that girl is definitely winning that race. Winning is good for everyone. Not everyone wins all the time, but the point of what's good for one is good for another has really come across this year to us as a lesson. You're explaining, you're sitting with a parent, maybe their parent is a teacher or their parent actually doesn't go to work, but they have the same concerns. And in social entrepreneurship, where we're focusing a lot on people, we tend to deal with people differently. I think generally people do that. So if someone comes in and they park their expensive Merc outside and they come in their expensive shirt, expensive, I see Bulgaria is big on Andrews, they come in with their expensive Andrews attire, people look at them differently, and sometimes people even give them different treatment. If someone just comes in their shorts and they're just like, yeah, in their t-shirt, and they're like, yeah, what's going on here? They get the corner sit and this guy gets the high sit. It's nature. But a lesson that has really come through us, I'll say again, is what's good for one person is good for another. And there's nothing wrong with spreading that goodness and being conscious to the fact that everyone actually has the same concerns about the same thing. So if we're talking about what's liberal arts education in the States, all the parents have the same concerns about that. They want to know, is my child going to become a lawyer after 4 years, or does he do pre-law and whatever? Where is my child going to stay? Where is my child going to sleep? It's the same concerns, and it comes back to what Mwabisa was actually mentioning this morning about seeing, about Ubuntu, seeing the person in you and seeing the person in the next person that you're working with. And that is very important with social entrepreneurship. So whatever it is you're trying to start, whatever you're doing, remember what's good for one is good for another. And then I'm not a very, I'm not sure if this is a good thing to say in a public forum, but I'm actually not an avid reader, but I do read. And I'm reading at the moment a book by Malcolm Gladwell. I'm sure some of you know him, called David and Goliath. I definitely recommend that book. And P.S. he hasn't paid me to do this marketing gig. But you should definitely look for it. And if you're not going to read the whole book, if you're going to borrow it for a day from a friend, do read the topic on advantage of disadvantage. And in that topic, he explores why actually being in a bad space is a good thing, why having a certain condition that everyone else is regarding as bad is a good thing. And that's a lesson I've learned. And the biggest lesson I've learned with this has come from being school sports network. That's just 3, 4 guys, sometimes just 2 guys, or even just myself on a certain weekend documenting a sport. You have these big national papers that they don't cover that sport every day. Maybe they cover that sport when there's a huge sponsor that's involved. But the advantage in that is because we're so small, and while we do care about the money that's going to come out of it, we're not bent on, we definitely need to get money on this. So when it comes to just information and knowledge about the players that are playing in a tournament when it becomes a big tournament, if you listen to the commentary that the big broadcasters and the big newspapers are doing compared to us, ours is more intimate because we've been following these guys throughout the whole year, throughout their whole 2 years, or throughout their whole career in high school. So we know them. And then there's a turnaround time. The biggest thing with entrepreneurship that I guess people don't realize is the lack of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is good in some cases, but when you're looking at turnaround time, innovating and ideas, bureaucracy is totally a bad thing. And being small, which is a legit disadvantage if you speak to entrepreneurs, becomes an advantage. Because it's just you and your partner, or it's you and 3 guys deciding, guys, what do you think about this opportunity that just came up? There's 4 guys, they're coming from Chile, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Morocco. They're coming in town. How about we just these guys are not going to know their way around town. They're not going to know how to speak Bulgarian, maybe a word or 2, because I can actually say it's zdrave. But that's all I know. And then someone just comes, oh, we can definitely do that for the weekend. How about we set up airport pickups and everything? Instead of going round with proposals and setting them, to the director, who then sends it to the board, and the board has to meet, and the board meeting only happens once every 6 months, that opportunity goes. But if you're small, which is a disadvantage, it becomes an advantage because you're meeting at a coffee shop or you're meeting at the S-Bar and you're just saying, guys, what are we doing this weekend? Okay, so I know the hotel they're staying. Let's just go and pitch and tell them, we'll take you on a tour around Sofia, we'll do this, and that's it. So I'll not go in and give 5, 6, 7 other examples, but just that example of something as obvious and something as basic as being small being a disadvantage, in that case, becomes an advantage. So you really need to be positive. There are a lot of things that could look as disadvantages, being African, being from Southern Africa, being from Bulgaria, being from Eastern Europe, being from wherever you're from. Then you just look at, I'm African, I'm Bulgarian, there's an advantage in that. And I can't help you see that, but I can tell you there is. And it's up to you to go and find it and put it to use. So do read Malcolm Gladwell's book, and if you're only going to read one chapter, do read the chapter on the advantage of disadvantage. I actually think this is my last slide. I'm not sure because, like I said, they're all jumbled up. And it's called Just Ask. It comes back to that thing of failing. If you ask, what's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is, I remember when we were growing up, you go and ask out a beautiful girl and they tell you, it's a big fat no. That's the worst thing that could actually happen. You get a big fat no, and when you're texting, it's capitalized N-O. Then you're like, okay. But that's the worst thing. If you get like a small N-O, that's actually like, okay, it's fine. And you can move on with life with even a smile. But even if you don't move on with a smile, it's just a couple of days, and after that, it's over. And I had this, last year, we actually started doing a radio station. And because we had the content and the radio stations didn't have the content because they didn't have a network that was as big as ours within the schools, I could easily call up 15 sports directors and they would give me information on what's happening during the weekend, and we could put up fixtures and we could do all sorts of stuff. So it was, again, that thing, the advantage of disadvantage. So we said, oh, we need to do a radio show, even maybe 10 minutes. We tried podcasting, but it wasn't really working well because data was so expensive, so people didn't want to like download, they just wanted to read stuff. So I went around, there were two like very newly launched radio stations, and they were like really looking for content, but they were like the first commercial radio stations in Zimbabwe. And one of them said, oh yeah, you can do that show. I think you have you have great content, and we would need 1,800 a month. It's like, but I'm giving you content, you're supposed to be paying me. And then I said, well, we're giving you a platform and we're giving you 300,000 listeners every night, so you have to. I was like, okay, I'll look for the money. When I get it, I'll come. I actually thought it was a good deal. It made a lot of sense to me. I mean, I was just trying to be sneaky to get it for free, but it made a lot of sense that they were giving us a bigger platform. Because like I said, we're only reaching 250,000 people thereabouts, and they had 300,000 that we could reach every night. But I didn't have the money, and we didn't have that in our budget, because it's just, again, the advantage of being very small. It's just something we decided over the coffee table, and we were like, yes, let's do it, without even thinking if we had the money or not. But then I remember the guy that I played rugby with when we played provincial rugby under 13, which is like primary school. He was now working at this other radio station, and he was sort of like well positioned. So call it corruption if you want, but I think it's networking, and Nwabisa can actually correct you. It's networking, it's not corruption. I called this guy, I was like, guy, how are you doing? It's like, I'm fine. It's like, so I've been thinking of doing like a show with the content that we have and everything that we have. We want to do it every Monday with like the update on what happened during the weekend, because most sporting events are during the weekend, and on the Friday with what's happening the coming weekend. It's like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, but yeah, I'm not your guy. I'm not in that department. It's like, but do you know someone who's in that department? It's like, oh yeah, I do. It's like, can you send me his number? It's like, okay. So he sent me his number. Again, just, it's funny how all this plays out, because it's the same thing that Nwabisa spoke about. Guys are just like, I'd played rugby with him like 10 years ago, and I knew he was there, but I could call him and say, can I have the number of the guy who's doing the show? So I think everyone should just go out and be like that. So he gave me that number, and I called it. I actually hadn't spoken to this guy, and this guy was actually a national cricketer, so we'd all seen him on TV playing in the World Cup and everything, and it was like, oh, I'm actually talking to him. So obviously being excited in sports, like, yes, I'm talking to him. I have his number in my cell phone. So I called him, he picks up. I'm like, yeah, I understand you're the business director at this, business development manager at this station. It's like, yeah, that's true. Who am I talking to? So I introduced myself. It's like, how did you get my contact details? So I told him where I got them from. He's like, oh, okay, what's up? How can I help you? It's like, so we want to do a show with you, and we just want to come in for like 5 minutes and give an update. It's like, Unfortunately, I don't have Friday and Monday open. It's a very expensive slot if you guys want it. But if you come in tomorrow, it's a Wednesday, and we have this guest show we have every Wednesday, so you guys can just come in and we'll slot you in and you do your show. It's like, tomorrow? Because tomorrow was Wednesday. It's like, yeah, just come in, ask for me, and you come in and do it. It's like, okay. So that was it. I just asked, and we started this radio show, and it then progressed to actually a paid show that was airing on Monday and the Friday. But it started with these like Wednesday slots, and that just came from asking. The worst that could have happened with that call is you could have said, no, I don't have time. Thank you for your call, or don't call me again. You could have said that, and that wouldn't have been tragic. That was it. And so this happened, this show happened, and we continue to grow, we continue to learn, and those I'd say are some of the most important lessons that I've learned running this startup. And some of you are probably wondering how old is this guy? As Neda said, he's very young. I don't feel as young anymore. But I actually turned 26 a couple of weeks ago on the 9th of September. So that's where we are with SSN, and these are the lessons that I've learned being involved in social enterprise, in a business that turned social enterprise to help students, and in a social enterprise that actually started as a social enterprise, which is Education Matters. Do visit the website. It's ssn.co.zw just to learn more about Zimbabwean school sport if you're excited about it. And Education Matters is edmattersafrica.org, and you can learn more about that. And in line and keeping with the theme for this slide, you can ask your questions. The worst thing that can happen is I can tell you I don't know. So feel free to ask.
I have a question, probably to all of you. It just came to my mind because we have been talking almost the whole day. Networking, relationships, contacts, and stuff like this. And we know in psychology there are introverts and extroverts. So does it mean that in order to build a successful social entrepreneurship and a successful network and working within that network, you have to be an extrovert? Because introverts sometimes have skill, they just can't show them.
Not necessarily. That could be very true in a lot of cases, but if you look at what Ismail said, he no longer builds anything by himself. So people have different qualities, people have different experiences, people are introverts, people are extroverts. That we can't do anything about that. We're people, right? But if you are, and you know who you are, and you know what you are, why don't you look, instead of a financing partner, why don't you look for the talking partner that can go out and talk, that can even talk to your network that he doesn't know but is actually a part of because he knows just by virtue of knowing you. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, but what it means is you do need someone who's free to talk, someone who's free to reach out, and that doesn't have to be you. We're not building sole proprietorships. If you're building an enterprise, you're building with someone, then partner with someone, look for the right qualities in a partner. If you're an introvert, don't look for another introvert. Maybe if you're looking for another introvert, have them do something else in their enterprise. Don't all say, okay, so we're this pair of introverts, we're going to go and ask for funding. It's not going to work. Can I add? Sure.
I think also a successful entrepreneur is somebody who has a great vision and is carrying that vision. Your role as an entrepreneur in growing your business is to make sure that your vision is being carried out, and where necessary, you are adjusting your vision. So if you are unfortunately not able to then be your own megaphone, then you find somebody who then is your megaphone, whether it is a PR company or an assistant or a partner. But your real purpose as an entrepreneur is to grow your business through your vision.
Any other questions before I...
Chenjerai, I would love to hear like a couple of words about the context of Zimbabwe, of the specifics of the country, and how do you think these specifics particularly match your endeavor at the School Sports Network?
So they actually don't match, to be honest. And
Awesome.
that's why my deck was titled An Unlikely Business in an Unlikely Place. I don't know if any of you have heard of Zimbabwe. Anyone? What do you know about Zimbabwe? It's in Africa, yes? Then maybe I should ask, what do you know about Africa, but...
I remember I had a friend in college who had studied in Zimbabwe. Her parents lived in Zimbabwe a little bit.
Did she share any stories about Zimbabwe? Do you remember any of them?
I think she talked a lot about beautiful nature, but I think she also mentioned that there were very big gaps in society, like
True.
very poor people.
Yeah. Anyone else? Like, if you just hear the word Zimbabwe, what comes to mind? So, yes, Zimbabwe is actually home to the Victoria Falls, which is one of the 7 natural wonders of the world. So, definitely. But just speaking of nature, the thing that, yes?
The $3 million Zimbabwe bill. $1 trillion.
Yes, it actually went up to 100 trillion. We had a $100 trillion bill, but now we're actually using US dollars, so that was like left in 2008. But if you put all these things together that come to mind first, and one of the reasons why I actually decided my presentation to be very visual is I'm sure some of you are thinking, I mean, even this picture, is that water polo? They play water polo in Zimbabwe? And you're thinking, oh, okay. And that's no one's fault. It's just not having the exposure and not thinking that sort of thing could happen. And the unfortunate thing is even people in Zimbabwe didn't think that this could happen. I mean, these were things that were just happening. They were there already, but no one was documenting them. I actually had a video of, I think it's this, about relationships. This is actually rowing on one of the dams that are close to the city, and it's a schools league for rowing, for crew. And it happens from as early as 13, 14 years, and kids do it throughout high school. So I was showing this video to a colleague, and he's like, where were you? It's like, yeah, I was here. He's like, what do you mean you were here? Where did you take this video? I was like, oh, just like 20 minutes outside of town. It's like, rowing? It's like, yes, it's rowing. It's like, it happens here? It's like, yes, it happens here. So when you look at all those things of people not knowing what's even happening around them or not knowing what's happening in another place, when you think of all the problems that you hear about Africa, a sports portal is not the first thing that comes to mind. We need to solve HIV and AIDS, we need to solve malaria, we need to solve education, we need to solve all these problems that are actually problems. I'm not saying they're not there. They're there, but they're the few things that are like magnified media-wise, and those are the problems that people know. People speak of problems in politics, problems in sanitation, and just to then think about, oh, it's a platform documenting school sport. It doesn't match that narrative, and just by looking at that, then it doesn't. But even for me, I mean, to be fair to everyone else, I didn't think it could happen. That's why I just wanted it to be a blog. I didn't think of it as a business. But then when you start doing it and people actually want to invest in it and people want to see it continuing, then you realize, oh, it actually works. But then it comes that lesson of just dive in, do it. Don't hold back. She said in the morning about jumping off a cliff and building wings as you go. If you hit the ground, you hit the ground. Most of the time, you're actually not going to die in entrepreneurship. Don't jump off a cliff. Like, don't. But virtually, when we're talking of entrepreneurship, just go, do it. And you realize that maybe this is... Because you can imagine what Mark Zuckerberg used to say when he was in school, when everyone was saying, I want to be a doctor when I grow up. What do you think he said? I want to be the CEO of Facebook? It wasn't there. You probably even dream about it. It wasn't a thing. But now it is. And people say, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a software engineer at Facebook. But that's the whole thing about just going and doing it. It doesn't match. It doesn't fit. But when you do it, it'll actually fit. I can't remember who said this, but it could be Mandela. Correct me if I'm wrong. That, that it always seems impossible until it's done. So when it's done and you're seeing it, then it's like, oh, it's actually doable. I mean, even this place that we're in, I don't know what was in this place before, but it was? So you can see that. It's a grocery store and people are coming in to buy their supplies and going away. Or some actually say, I don't shop in that grocery store, they don't do well, or they don't sell fresh stuff, or whatever. And then today we're in this beautiful place sitting and sharing ideas and sharing opinions on social entrepreneurship. So before it's done, it always seems impossible and it never fits. The fit actually comes when it's done and you can all see it. That's when we can all agree on fit. To say something big is going to come out of Bulgaria, people will give you all sorts of reasons why it's not going to happen out of Bulgaria. But when it does happen, then people say, oh yeah, it makes sense that it's coming out of there because they have this advantage, this advantage, this advantage, this advantage, and it works in their favor. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. More questions?
Thank you for your presentation and for your presence here. I'm presenting an organization that is promoting the entrepreneurship education. So to be convenient or just to relax and to do it in business, in entrepreneurship, how do you think it helps the entrepreneurship education? Is it popular also in Zimbabwe? And from how early?
So entrepreneurship education is, I think we had a similar question in the morning, and it actually makes sense that these questions are coming in because people want to know how it's happening elsewhere. And all across Africa, I'll say, I'll speak for my cousin from South Africa and my cousin from Morocco. I think one thing that has happened in Africa is these hubs are coming up everywhere, and you have shared working spaces, startup hubs, incubators, and everything, and they're working as the big education and knowledge imparters in terms of entrepreneurship education. The problem with business schools, like you had Nwabisa give an example of a business school giving a case study for Walmart, is, and it comes back again to that advantage of disadvantage where they take so long to reform those things. To say, okay, let's hire Infinity and let's sit with them and let's hear what they're saying. It's going to take a year for them to implement that. Maybe if Infinity is pushy, it'll take 6 months. Whereas with these places that are not formal, that can just change, like hubs, they can just decide, oh, we're going to teach about the business model canvas today. And if it doesn't work for you, leave it, try something else. So in terms of education, there's actually a study that was done in Zimbabwe. It was done by a graduate student at Oxford University in the UK. I'll try and give you a link, but if you just search hubs in Africa, Zimbabwe was one of his study subjects, hubs in Africa, and you put Oxford in the search term, you will have a whole article on that. But education for entrepreneurship, really, whether social or what people just want to call commercial entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship in general has been happening at these hubs that are really informal and they just pick on a topic, and people are starting to use, I mean, because internet is only becoming cheaper in Africa now, people are also starting to use resources online. We were talking about an online learning platform this morning. People are starting to use those, people are starting to use YouTube videos to learn things, and from how early, then I can't tell you, because I'm sure that there's some kids that are even starting to program and code while they're maybe in grade 3, grade 4, because they have that access. But overall, it's happening maybe straight after high school, or when people are about 16, 17, because in our education system, you actually take a 3-4 month break before you go in to do A-levels. That's when a lot of people are being exposed to entrepreneurship as an idea and entrepreneurship as a possible career, not just hoping to be employed by someone else. There was a question there.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for a very inspiring presentation and for being here with us, because I find it really interesting that you, being from Zimbabwe, I know that this country which tackles with a lot of issues regarding corruption and bureaucracy, and it might be difficult to found organization and especially social enterprise. And I really admire your positivity and your attitude, that you are really doing a great job by empowering young people with education and so on. So I would like to ask you, how do you tackle these issues with bureaucracy and corruption? Because I'm sure you're not corrupted and you are, and I'm just very direct, and I really like it, and I think that your example should be seen everywhere in the world. So thank you so much, and just tell us your know-how. How do you do it?
Thank you for those kind words. So remember what we're talking about when I said, what do you people know about Zimbabwe? And we had very few answers. And now you're coming up and saying, the one thing I know about Zimbabwe is corruption and bureaucracy, which is very true. But in the sense of business, I mean, there are all these studies that are done by companies that are not even existent in Africa. To be fair to them, they're in business, so they're doing it for money and whatever. And unfortunately, that's the literature that people read. And the young generation in Africa now is saying, we now need to start telling our own story. And my own story with that is, it's actually very easy to start a company in Zimbabwe, depending on the type of company you want to start. So if you're coming from wherever else into Zimbabwe saying, I want to invest $2 million, there's obviously a lot of bureaucracy that's involved with that. But I don't have $2 million to invest in anything. There's actually an act that was passed in 1996. So this is not a buzzword thing happening in 2010. It was passed in 1996. And it allows anyone that's above the age 18 to start a company by themselves, but that company is not recognized as a sole proprietorship. You know from business school that if you're sole proprietor, the liability is all on you and everything. And so there's always a benefit in starting a company that is seen as an entity. And that was the Private Business Corporation Act. And you can start a company by yourself. You can have directors. You can actually have up to 20 directors, but you can register that company by yourself. But what I would say is the biggest problem is that information is not, it's there, it was passed in 1996, but a lot of people are only realizing that, oh, this was passed more than a decade ago and it's up for grabs. You can register a company, you can start your, working through your company registration and everything, and by next week you can have your documents, you can open a bank account, you can do anything, and if you get someone to do it for you, it's $70. So that's with consultancy and everything. If you get to do it by yourself, you register for $35, and actually School Sports Network is registered as a private business corporation. So you just go there, because you're doing it by yourself, there's very little bureaucracy involved in that. But if you want to form a private limited company, then there's articles of incorporation, the memorandum, and the constitution, and everything that's involved, then it becomes. But when people are doing these studies from wherever else they are, that's not in Zimbabwe, the message that gets spread across is you can't run a startup in Zimbabwe, you can't get registered, you can't get a bank account, you can't do this. So in terms of that, the way I dealt with it was actually just walk to the company's registry office, paid my $20, they did their name search and everything, and after $35, I had my company, and then it grew from there. But in terms of corruption, I'm not trying to make everything flowery and say it's not there. It could be there. It's there everywhere. Actually, it's not just a Zimbabwean problem. I think it's a global problem. And the way you deal with that, I think, is keeping your nose clean. If you obviously are looking at a clean exit, or growing your company in a clean way. Because whenever you decide to do something dodgy, to do something on the side, for that, I mean, it becomes a whole ethical issue where people are saying, but what's corruption, what's not corruption? If you find yourself doing something that you think twice about, and in thinking twice about it, you're saying, I shouldn't be doing this, then that is the true definition of corruption to you. But if you find yourself doing something that you're, oh, this is an opportunity, I can take this. Like me calling my friend from 10 years ago, I don't know if you can call them a friend, I don't think that was corrupt in any way, but it got me a contact I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So just keep your nose clean, because it does help. And if you want to build a global business, a business that grows into the future, when you don't keep your nose clean, it will come back and bite you, and people are, oh, what's happening here? What happened there? And you don't want that. So especially with social entrepreneurship, because we're dealing with people most of the time, it's people's lives. You should see, again, I'll use that word which was introduced to all of us in the morning, Ubuntu. You should see the person in the next person and just have enough respect for that person as well as yourself. You don't want to play with something that would potentially mess up someone's life, because then there's nothing that stops us from classifying you as a murderer. Yeah.
More questions? No? Okay, guys.
Yeah, I think we're done.
Zvino mati zvamunoenda nesango